The beginning of the 20th century has been characterized by a revolution in chemical thought more wonderful than any which has ever been seen. This is a quote by the Scottish chemist Sir William Ramsay from 1905, the year after he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his incredible discovery of the noble gases: helium, neon, argon, krypton, and xenon. But here, he actually wasn't referring to his own work. He was referring to something that even he thought was even greater: the discovery of radioactivity. In 1903, Henri Becquerel, Pierre Curie, and Maria Skłodowska-Curie won the Nobel Prize in Physics for this discovery. The Curies in particular gained international fame for their work. Here they are on the cover of Vanity Fair, with Pierre holding a vial containing the 0.1 grams of radium chloride that they were able to obtain after 4 years of backbreaking work. If you haven't already seen my video on how they did this, I'll link it below. It's an amazing story. After it was announced, the world became fascinated by radium, the incredibly rare element that spontaneously and continuously gave out an endless supply of light and heat. Shortly after they received their Nobel Prize, an American reporter called Cleveland Moffett traveled to Paris to meet Pierre Curie and to find out everything he could about radium. I want to tell you about their meeting because some of the stuff I read in Moffett's article was incredible. First, he spoke to Pierre's student and assistant, Jacques Dan, and asked him, was it true? Could it be true that this strange substance gives forth heat and light ceaselessly and is really an inexhaustible source of energy? Dan replied, it is quite true that pure radium gives out light and heat without any waste or diminution that can be detected by our most delicate instruments. That is all we can say. Is the light that it gives a bright light? Reasonably bright. Monsieur Curie will show you. Can he explain it? Can anyone explain it? There are various theories, but they really explain very little. And all this is Monsieur Curie's discovery. Radium is his discovery, that is, his and Madame Curie's. You cannot give one more credit than the other. They did it together. Moffett later wrote, they say that her marriage with Monsieur Curie was just such a union as must have produced some fine result. Without his scientific learning and vivid imagination, it is doubtful if radium would ever have been dreamed of, and without her determination and patience against detail, it is likely the dream would never have been realized. The day after he met Dan, he went to l'École de Physique, the School of Physics, where Pierre was working in his lab. He said that he found Pierre bending over a small porcelain dish where a colorless liquid was simmering, perhaps half a teacupful, and he was watching it with concern, always fearful of some accident. Pierre told him that he was refining some radium dissolved in it, that is, freeing it from contaminating barium by repeated crystallization. That is, to the state of pure radium, to the state of pure chloride of radium. You know the metal exists only as a chloride or bromide. It has never yet been isolated, although it easily might be. Why has it never been isolated? Because it would not be stable. It would immediately be oxidized by the air and destroyed, as happens with sodium, whereas it remains permanent as a bromide or chloride and suffers no change. Pierre opened a drawer and pulled out a small vial that was wrapped in lead foil. Within was a tiny amount of white powder, pure radium chloride. He explained that the lead blocked the harmful rays that would otherwise make trouble. Trouble? Yes, you see, the radium in this tube is very active. It has an intensity of 1.5 million, and if I were to lay it against your hand or any part of your body so, he touched my hand with the bare tube, and if I were to leave it there for a few minutes, you would certainly hear from it later. But I feel nothing. Of course not. Neither did I feel anything when I touched some radium here. And pulling up his sleeve, he showed me a forearm scarred and reddened from fresh-healed sores. But you see what it did, and it was much less intense than this specimen. Later, Pierre took Moffett to a dark room so that he could see the light being given off of the tiny quantity of radium. Moffett described it as a clear glow sufficient to read by if the tube were held near a printed page. He said to Pierre, then radium may be the light of the future. Pierre shook his head. I'm afraid that we should pay rather dearly for such a light. There is first the money cost to be considered, and then the likelihood that the people illuminated by radium would also be stricken with paralysis, blindness, and various nervous disorders. For a long time to come, the radium light will only be a laboratory wonder. Next, Pierre wrapped the vial of radium in thick paper and placed it in Moffett's hand. Now, shut your eyes and press this against your right eyelid. I did as he bade me, and straight away had the sensation of a strange diffused light outside my eye. Monsieur Curie assured me, however, that the light was not outside, but inside the eye, the radium rays having the property of making the liquids of the eyeball self-luminous, a sort of internal phosphorescence being produced. He warned me that it would be dangerous to leave the radium against the eyelid very long, as a serious disturbance to the eyesight or even blindness might result. This dramatic demonstration wrapped up Moffett's first meeting with Pierre, but he wasn't done yet. He had to know more. He went back on a later date, shortly after Pierre had returned from London, where he had been lecturing about radium to the Royal Institution. Moffett said that this time, when he saw him, his hands were much peeled and very sore from too much contact with radium, and for several days he had been unable to dress himself, but he took it good-naturedly and proceeded to describe some of the experiments he had made before British scientists. Let's start with the simplest. Pierre demonstrated that radium continually gave off heat by taking two identical glass vessels, each with a thermometer inside. In one, he put a small vial of radium. By comparing the two thermometers, it was easy to see that the vial containing the radium was always 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit or 3 degrees Celsius warmer than the other vial. This temperature difference seemed to remain perpetually, as if the radium was an eternal supply of heat. Pretty amazing, right? But the next experiment might be one of the coolest I've ever come across, so I hope you're ready. Pierre wanted to demonstrate that not only did radium emit radioactive rays, it also seemed to continually release a radioactive gas, which Pierre called radium emanation. An easy way to show that something is radioactive is to hold it near a phosphorescent substance like zinc sulfide, which glows green in the presence of radioactive rays. But here's the tricky part. How do you prove that the glow is from a radioactive gas that radium is emitting, rather than from the radioactive radium itself? Well, Pierre had the answer. He used this apparatus in front of the Royal Institution and poured a radium solution into tube R, above which was a stopcock, F, which could be closed to separate the radium from the rest of the apparatus. He started with the stopcock closed to allow the radium emanations to build up in tube R. Meanwhile, bulbs A and B were lined with the phosphorescent zinc sulfide. Just ignore vessel G for now, that'll come into play later. Tube E connected to an air pump, which was able to exhaust the air from the apparatus, apart from tube R, which he'd already sealed off, so the radium emanations could continue to build up. Once the air was exhausted, Pierre closed the stopcock at the top to maintain the vacuum within the apparatus. Here's where the magic happened. The lights in the room were turned out so that everyone was able to see if the zinc sulfide was phosphorescing. At this distance, the radium's own rays, some of which are able to pass through glass, are unable to cause phosphorescence in bulbs A and B. However, as soon as Pierre opened stopcock F, the radium emanations passed along the tube into bulbs A and B, and the zinc sulfide immediately began phosphorescing. Amazing, right? It gets even cooler. Pierre would then close stopcock F and lower bulb B into vessel G, which contained liquid air, at roughly -200 degrees C. Over time, the phosphorescence in bulb A decreased and the phosphorescence in bulb B increased until bulb A was completely dark and all of the phosphorescence was coming from bulb B. This proved that Pierre was able to cool the radioactive gas to the point that it condensed into a liquid, dropped out of bulb A, and gathered entirely in bulb B. What a phenomenally elegant experiment. The Curies had spent 4 years working in very unpleasant conditions to isolate radium. A cramped, crumbling shed that leaked when it rained and got freezing cold in the winter. It's not uncommon to see chemists and alchemists throughout history hunched over uncomfortable workspaces, suffering through stiffness and back pain to get the job done. I mean, we experience the exact same thing today, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's why I'm happy to have FlexiSpot sponsoring this video. The crazy thing is, I actually bought myself a FlexiSpot E7 premium standing desk months before they even reached out to me about a sponsorship. So I can tell you from personal experience that this desk has massively improved my workspace. It allows me to set the most ergonomic height for when I'm sitting, and when I feel like I've been sitting for too long, it allows me to switch to a standing desk at the push of a button. Having that flexibility makes a huge difference when you have a desk job like I do. The dual-motor 3-stage T-shaped frame structure has a 180 kilogram load capacity, way more than I'd ever actually need, and it's extremely smooth and stable when changing heights. Not only that, there's a 15-year warranty and a 30-day risk-free return service. Also, FlexiSpot are currently having their Christmas sale with up to 65% off standing desks, ergonomic chairs, and more. Use my code YTE730 to get an extra $30 off your own E7 and E7 Pro standing desk. And don't miss out on the chance to win free orders during their holiday events. Check out their activity calendar on the FlexiSpot website for all the details. Okay, let's get back to some more amazing experiments on radium. While Pierre was at the Royal Institution in London, he spoke with the English scientist Sir William Crookes. Earlier that year, Crookes, who was known as a superb experimentalist, had been sent a sample of radium bromide. During his investigations of the strange substance, he accidentally spilled some onto a zinc sulfide screen. Small glowing specks became visible on the surface where the tiny crystals had scattered. To make sure he recovered every particle of the most expensive matter on the planet, he scanned across the screen with a microscope and saw something amazing. He realized that he had to replicate what he had seen so that others could see this too. So, he invented a special device and published an explanation of how to make it. All you have to do is to fit the blend screen at the end of a brass tube with a speck of radium salt in front of it and about a millimeter off, and to have a lens at the other end. I propose to call this little instrument the spinthariscope, from the Greek word spintharis, a scintillation. When Pierre was in London, Crookes showed him his spinthariscope. Here's how Moffett described it. The experiment must be made in a darkened room after the eye has gradually acquired its greatest sensitiveness to light. To the eye thus sensitive and looking intently through the lenses, the screen appears like a heaven of flashing meteors, among which stars shine forth suddenly and die away. Near the central radium speck, the fire shower is most brilliant, while towards the rim of the circle it grows fainter. And this goes on continuously as the metal throws off its emanations. These myriad bursting, blazing stars are the emanations, at least we may assume it, and become visible as the scattered radium dust or radium vapor impinges speck by speck upon the screen, which, for each tiny fragment, flashes back a responsive phosphorescence. Monsieur Curie spoke of this vision that was really contained within the area of a 2-cent piece as one of the most beautiful and impressive he had ever witnessed. It was as if he had been allowed to assist at the birth of a universe, or at the death of a molecule. Isn't that utterly beautiful? Can you imagine what Pierre must have thought seeing this for the first time? His and Maria's years of grueling effort had created magic now visible to the human eye. Shortly after his return from London, Pierre attended a party in Lille and brought some radium along with him. While there, he used it to demonstrate another interesting property, that radium causes diamonds to burst into a brilliant phosphorescence. To the delight of the guests at the party, he used his tiny radium vial to identify who was wearing real diamonds and who was wearing fake ones. So, how about radium emanation? What was it? Going back a couple of years to 1902, the New Zealand physicist Ernest Rutherford and the English chemist Frederick Soddy demonstrated that radium emanation, despite being radioactive, was extremely unreactive by way of its chemical properties. No matter what they tried, they couldn't seem to get a chemical reaction going. This inevitably caught the eye of Sir William Ramsay. Could radium emanation be related to his noble gases? Shortly afterwards, Ramsay worked with Soddy, attempting some even more extreme reaction conditions, including things like mixing the emanation with oxygen over a strong alkali and passing an electric spark through the mixture for several hours, but even then, nothing happened. The radium emanation was chemically inert. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet is that radium wasn't the only element that gave off emissions in the form of a chemically inert radioactive gas. Thorium and actinium had been observed doing exactly the same thing, although their emanations seem to have different radioactive half-lives. In fact, it was Rutherford who coined the term emanation in 1900 when describing thorium emanation. In 1904, Ramsay announced that he had managed to record a spectrum for radium emanation and thus confirmed that it was a brand new element. But what to call this element? Well, in his paper he said, as it is derived from radium, why not name it simply X-radio? Similarly, he suggested that if the thorium and actinium emanations were also shown to be elements in the future, they should be named X-thorio and X-actinio. A few years later, in 1910, Ramsay published another paper describing more properties of radium emanation, and he suggested another name for the element, niton, after the Latin word for shining, since the gas was, as Ramsay described it, brilliantly luminous when viewed in a dark room. Shortly after this, Soddy introduced the concept of isotopes, and it became accepted that the three emanations were all isotopes of the same element, since they had identical chemical properties and only differed slightly in atomic mass. In 1918, the German chemist Kurt Schmidt proposed the names radon, thoron, and acton for the isotopes, and in 1923, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry selected the name of the most stable isotope, radon, as the official name of the element. Radon was the sixth noble gas to be discovered, and it's slotted neatly at the bottom of Group 8 in the periodic table. Now, hopefully, you can understand Ramsay's excitement in his quote from the beginning of the video. What I've shown here is only a fraction of the amazing work that went into the radioactive elements when they were first discovered. If you enjoyed this, then you'll love hearing about the early experiments into radium's effects on living organisms. I couldn't believe what I was reading while I was researching it. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make that video, and if you'd like to support the channel, please subscribe or check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.